very warmly thanking the conference organizer and the European Academy of Religion for extending this invitation to give a lecture here. I'm very happy to be part of this wonderful event. Also want to warmly thank the organizers, Francesca and Lisa and all the team who've done an absolutely astounding job of making us comfortable and happy here. So this talk is a sort of a summary of a work in progress of something I've been doing over the years, trying to get grips with the way Chinese relate to their gods and the way they learn to live with their gods through various ritual means of creating interpersonal and intersubjective connections with the gods and thus building themselves as persons and also letting the gods build themselves as persons in the process. The talk is in 3 parts. The first one, I'll start from my own data. Right? I'm an historian, so I'm very pragmatic. I start from data, and so I'll introduce some of the data, which is primarily, not uniquely, but primarily about spirit writing, which is a ritual techniques for creating lasting communication and interaction with the gods. And the way spirit writing in the Chinese context allows the gods to act as subjects. That is, not only provide the kind of things many humans want from the gods, that is immediate benefits, you know, healing, rain, whatever, but also to let them become of age and act as subjects and create meaningful relationship with human subjects. The second part is about how to understand the way these gods act as subject within a relational approach. And I'm going to talk about the way these relationships between humans and gods in the Chinese context are not only one and are not primarily one-to-one relationship between one unique human and one unique god, but are constituted and built and developed within what I call assemblages of gods and humans. And so we are going to talk a little bit about the social lives of gods, and I'll introduce how I've been using social network analysis methods to understand the way gods and humans become persons and subject within through those complex interactions involving many actors, both invisible and human. And in the third and last part, I'm going to open this data and analytical framework to a more theoretical and therefore comparative perspective through a few propositions on how we can try to compare the Chinese data with other data elsewhere in the world and look in a more general way at processes of divine personification and subjectivation. Okay, now spirit writing in the Chinese context and spirit writing alters. So I've been recently publishing a book called The Ritual Production of Revelation in Chinese Religious History, which is about the way through over 2 millennia of Chinese history, various ritual techniques for interacting with gods and letting the gods offer revelation, that is discursive text that they impart to humans in order to help humans save themselves. And the core element of this history is the emergence around the 11th century of spirit writing as one of many ritual techniques for letting the gods talk to humans. So the image on the left is a picture I took maybe some 20 years ago or so in a spirit writing group in Hong Kong. So here you have some of the Chinese terms for spirit writing. Zhongbi means B is a brush, so it means a descending brush or a brush that manifests divine presence to come down from heaven to this earth. Fei Luan is flying phoenix, because phoenix is one of the names for the writing implements, or wooden writing implements. And there are many, many other terms. Actually, spirit writing is a family of techniques. It's not one technique. But there are many emic terms, but the Chinese also recognize that these different ritual techniques are part of a larger whole of coherent whole of allowing the gods to write answers to our questions or to offer spontaneously doctrinal, moral, or other sort of revelations. So as you can see on the picture here, it's in Hong Kong today there are over 300 spirit writing groups like this. There are many more in Taiwan. There used to be thousands, if not tens of thousands, within mainland China. It's not. It's banned in mainland China now for various reasons, but it's actually still practiced more or less overtly in various parts of the country. And of course, in Chinese communities worldwide. There was a Chinese spirit writing group near Paris, but it's stopped operation a few years ago. So you have a medium. So here you see the standing woman acts as a solo medium, but there are also techniques with two mediums, both of them holding one side of the writing implement. And so she has called down the gods, in that case the immortal patriarch Lu, and we are going to see him in a moment, through ritual means, including incantations and talisman convocation of the god. And once her hands is possessed, so it's a very quiet possession, right? She's not like jumping or crying or shouting like certain spirit mediums do. It's a very quiet possession. Only the hands are possessed, and through the hands of the medium, the god is writing on either sand or ashes from the incense burner. In that case, it's ashes. And so she's writing one character at a time, and the person sitting next to her is writing this down, right, on paper. And of course, because she writes very fast and sand is not very easily legible, but she, of course, the helper is trained to read that. And in any case, the gods will afterwards proofread the text that has been written down and might sometimes say, no, you got it wrong. This is not this character, it's that character, right? And after that, most seances involved people coming and asking questions to the gods. So that may involve healing or divination or asking for divine help or all kinds of issues. But quite often the god will also say, okay, no, I have something more important to tell you, and offer a general revelation that might involve doctrinal scriptures or morality instructions and so on and so forth. So as said before, that this technique or this range of ritual techniques seems to emerge in the 11th century, more or less, and have developed continuously ever since, so to the present day. It involves the gods that are invited to write with the phoenix. Can be many, but they are mostly a personal salvation god, that is, gods that have pledged to use this technique to help humans save themselves individually and collectively, and who really care for the people they deal with. So members of spirit writing groups are accepted by the god individually as their disciples. So there is a very strong and often very emotionally charged bond created between the god writing to the humans and the humans who take the god as their spiritual master. And there is a strong, I'm not going to talk much about this today, but there is a strong eschatological inspiration between the whole, behind the whole history of Chinese spirit writing, because the gods very explicitly say in a number of texts that this is the most time-effective way to save humanity at a moment when the end times are very near. Right, so through spirit writing, they can talk to the largest numbers of humans. So they can preach and try to save the largest numbers of humans when time is of the essence. And this is also a technique that gives a voice to thousands and thousands of spirits. So including those high salvational gods, and I'm going to mention a few in a moment, but also all kinds of local spirits who appear sometimes. People who have deceased humans who appear and say, okay, no, I was that person when I was alive, and now I am, I have this position in different bureaucracy, and I want to talk with you. But sometimes unknown spirits, not all of them humans, most of them, but not all of them humans. There are important spirit writing gods who used to be animals, trees, rocks, and so on and so forth, right? But they emerge as persons through spirit writing, and they talk about themselves and explain how they came to become gods. I won't talk too much about this, but briefly introducing a major international collaborative project we've been doing since 2019, which is an open access Wikimedia-based database, descriptions of all Chinese religious texts. It's called CRTA, Chinese Religious Text Authority. And within that open access database, we've been describing lots of spirit writing texts, because spirit writing texts account for a large part of the what we call in China call late imperial, basically 16th to early 20th century Chinese religious literature. There are tens of thousands of texts and books, editions, and we are just trying to describe them all in that database. And so that's the page for the text on the right, and I'm not going to read that obviously, but I just want, it's actually a very late text, right, 1935, short, not particularly influential, right? But I just choose this example to show how gods, in that case, Guandi, which is a martial god, it's often called in English the god of war, Chinese god of war, how he addresses his disciples through spirit writing. And the characters highlighted in yellow here is the Chinese I, war. I tell you this, I want this, I tell you, right? And this is, I think, a clear, visually clear example of how the gods, when they use spirit writing to communicate with humans, really act as subject, that is, using the first person pronouns to talk about themselves and how they feel and what they want and their affects and their hopes and their visions, right? I want this, I tell you this, I request you to do this and that, right? So when we look at that kind of documents, and again, in a huge amount of spirit written documents, and how the gods in those documents act as subject, then we can begin to read this vast documentation not only as a resource for studying the history of Chinese religious ideas and doctrines. We can do that as well, of course, and this is being done, myself and other colleagues who are interested in that literature. But we can also read those texts as expressions of divine subject and intersubjective relations between the gods and humans, and in fact, as we will see, between different gods themselves. Right. So in those texts, the gods tell and retell their own stories to no end. And this is quite striking. When a new god appears and introduces himself, right, just like an actor on stage, right, say, coming on stage and say, okay, I'm introduce myself, I am this person, I have done this in before, and this is my, main traits of character. Okay, but when a god like Guandi, who is worshipped in thousands of various spirit writing altars, and where the members of those altars communicate with the god, at least often nowadays on a weekly basis, sometimes on a daily basis, over years and decades, right? And still, each time the god appears, he or she again tells us, I am this person, I am Guan Yu, and I was, a valiant soldier in the early 3rd century of the Common Era, and I've done, slayed by enemies, but I'm I have this and that virtue. This is striking because everyone knows that, right? It's like your old friend you're seeing every day, and each time you meet your friend and say, I am your friend, I am this person, I was born in that year. That's not necessary, right? It's not meaningful information. It's actually a performance of subject, reminding the other entities, humans or divine, they're interacting with, that they have this unique personality, and they have this interiority and feelings and aspirations. And as a result, so the gods not only tell their own stories briefly to introduce themselves, but in some cases, actually a good number of cases, write full-fledged, book-length autobiographies, or as we may say, autohagiographies. And we have really striking revelations of that kind, covering hundreds of pages where the gods talk about themselves at great length. So not only in writing, but also in drawing. So what you have on the right is a self-portrait of an immortal, also revealed through spirit writing, or in that case, spirit drawing. So that's immortal Lu Zu, means Lu is his family name, and Zu means patriarch, is one of the most important Taoist gods of the early modern period, a master of inner alchemy, so a teacher of these self-transformation techniques, allowing humans to become immortal, and also one of the most important gods in spirit writing circles since the 16th century to the present. And so that's his self-drawn portrait, riding a crane to come down to earth and meet his disciples. Personal style is a very important element of divine subjectification in the context of spirit writing. Each of those gods, and across various, not only in one place, in one group, but across various spirit writing authors, and that's where it gets really interesting. It's not just one medium doing the same thing all over again, which is easy enough to understand, but the same God in various places. And as you surely know, China is a rather vast country. So we have spirit writing separated by thousands of kilometers and across time, all the way from the 11th century, but it really accelerated in the 16th century down to the present. And in all those different contexts and different groups who didn't know each other, the gods tend to have a very coherent style, the way they write poetry and prose. Right? So when you read a spirit-written poem by a certain god, you immediately, well, in some cases, for the most important divine authors, if you like, you immediately recognize the style. And of course, this leads to all kinds of authentication processes, because at the same time as spirit writing is a very mainstream practice in late imperial China, most educated people by the 19th century, at least, it's of course impossible to come up with reliable statistics, right? But it seems reasonable to hypothesize that most educated people by that time had been at least witness to a spirit writing seance a couple of times in their life. This is extremely mainstream, much more mainstream than Western planchette or Ouija board writing, which was also quite common, but was not culturally mainstream the way spirit writing was in Chinese culture. These literati who were engaging in spirit writing through the gods and changing poetry with the god would recognize the poetic style of the gods. And some of them would be skeptical, very rarely between the 20th century, skeptical of the very principle of the existence of the gods and the possibility of communicating with them through spirit writing, but they might be skeptical of specific cases, of specific mediums, right? And the literature is full of examples of this. People and mediums starting to write a poem saying, I am Guan Yu, and writing a poem that is not in the style of Guan Yu, and everyone would go, no, you're faking it. This is not Guan Yu, this is not his style, right? So style is also an important way of both allowing the gods to really maintain their unique identity and way of doing things and writing and talking, but also of authenticating revelations. They also express affects, and this might also strike us as unexpected from very high salvational gods who claim to be in charge of universal salvation and who come down and talk to their human disciples in very intimate ways, talking about love and fear and anxiety and expectations and disappointment and so on and so forth. And so all of these constitute a very powerful, I think, medium for creating intersubjective relations with humans and other gods. And the gods also talk to themselves. Right? It's not, again, not a one-to-one relationship. Usually in a spirit writing atoll, you have one main god, so like Lu Zu or Guandi. But many other gods or spirits would come and they would talk to each other. They would exchange poetry. They would also exchange affects, right? Gods expressing their affects towards other gods, usually positive. A few cases of antagonism between gods, but that's not very common. But that it's also possible. So all of this ritually creates a situation where humans learn to live in the society of the gods. They learn to create intense emotional sociability. So between the different humans who also take part in that project, which again is an eschatological salvationist project. It's spirit writing also a very powerful mean for people who fail to achieve their dreams in this world of being an official or a very successful person, but who is chosen by the gods to be their associate and helper to save humanity. So that really gave in the past and still today give active members for the writing groups a very strong sense of a mission and their own importance in the larger scheme of things. Gods encourage humans through the instruction they give to them through spirit writing to relate them in very specific modes, right? Asking them to observe certain fasts, to worship icons in various ways, and they explain how to create icons and to worship them, or to I call embody text, that is perform the text by chanting them on a very intense, regular regimen, and so on and so forth. And all of this somehow, in some ways, resonates with other works such as psychological anthropologist Tanya Lohmann, and here you have the cover of one of her books, but that she has published quite a bit on the topic, who is talking about how she's mostly done field work with Christian evangelicals, but not only, but mostly, and how being part of those Christian groups, the members learn how to engage in interpersonal relationship with God, and how they are trained to speak to God and to hear back the response of God. So that in many ways, what the Chinese spirit writing practitioners do is comparable to this training process of learning to live in an enchanted, if you like, world where gods are present and are really everyday actors you meaningfully engage with and interact with. But as I will explain later, I also depart from Tanya Lohmann's analysis in some significant ways. But still, this is, I think, one of the good departure points we can take to compare the Chinese data with other religious practices elsewhere in the world. And spirit writing is actually one of the ways to create this mutual spaces of mutual subjectivation, allowing the gods to become subject, to talk to us about themselves, but also to allow humans to become subject or enrich themselves, get an even more thicker, deeper subject through this experience of living in the society of the gods. And divine personas grow stronger in relation to their sociability. What I mean by this is that in spirit writing revelation, when you have a spirit just appearing once and saying something very general, you don't have a subject, right? And not all the gods talking through spirit writing act as subject. So subjectification is potential. It's always there as a potential, but not all the gods seize on that potential and become subject. Many spirits just appear occasionally and say very general things, which still are meaningful, right, in terms of their contents, right? They might explain certain doctrinal points or give moral instructions or technical ritual instructions, and that's very useful for the humans who receive that and very meaningful. But they don't talk about themselves. But the more often the God talk to or write to humans and interact with each other, then the more well-defined, thicker their personality become, their persona. In some cases, personas in the plural. So that's why a relational approach to this subjectification process is necessary, right? So to end up with that first part of my presentation, what is being communicated through spirit writing encompasses a large array of things, including a space to subjectify oneself, allowing all the actors, humans and divine, to talk about themselves, to express what they really are. Blessings, including healing. One of the main functions historically of spirit writing groups is healing. Cures, alcohol. So Immortal Lu, we just saw before, likes to drink with his disciples and write, drinking poetry, that kind of things. So magical things are actually exchanged as well, not only discourse, discursive contents. So affects, love, awe, fear, anticipation, so on and so forth. Initiation and divine status, beyond healing, the main reason why people join spirit writing groups is that they become gods themselves when they die. And this is a very common pattern. And you can still observe that today in spirit writing groups. Often when a member of spirit writing group dies, sometimes as early as a few days later, he would appear through spirit writing saying, okay, no, I'm in heaven, I've taken up my position as vice minister for the retribution of, meritorious actions under the ministry of this and that. And, I know I can continue discussing with you and giving you instruction from the beyond, right? And also actually discursive contents, knowledge, practical and cosmological. And this is what has been most studied in the spirit written literature. And this is important, obviously, but as the kind of approach I'm proposing in this presentation today focuses less on the discursive contents and more on the process of subjectification through expressing affects. Okay, one more word about this project, but to explain what I am not doing here. The question of personal religion, person-to-person relations with the gods, is also something that is being explored and pursued in the field of cognitive science of religion. And I'm absolutely not saying that's not relevant or interesting. This is just not the kind of perspective I'm bringing to my Chinese and comparative sources. And that's where I depart from, for instance, Tanya Lohmann, who is using a lot of this cognitive science of religion to explain how, the cognitive processes through which humans who are trained in religious groups to hear the voice of the gods sort of rewire themselves to live in that world where gods are persons we can interact with. This is interesting, but I depart from this perspective in a number of ways. First, the question of the mode of existence of gods, and this is obviously not a small question, and I'm not going to really go into it today. But the cognitive science of religion tends to assume that gods are just mental images. And of course, why not? But to make sense of the kind of data I'm working with, I don't think that's the most effective ways. And I think we need to assume other modes of existence for gods that really account better for the way they assume personas and become subjects and talk to us. Something is happening outside of the brains of the humans involved, I think. Second, personal bonds are not, and I've mentioned this before, are not one-to-one relationship. They really emerge and appear and develop within larger groups. It's a specific type of sociality which is not exclusive, which is not a one human to one God relation, but really can only develop within a larger sociality with lots of humans and lots of gods. And third, cognitive science of religion tends to assume that basically human brains work more or less the same way or across humanity, and so the same processes that were at work, whether in China or Italy or the people living in the forest of Borneo or anywhere else. Whereas I think that there are really crucial differences between what I would call ritual cultures. That is, the availability of the ritual means for creating this interaction between man and God produce entirely different conditions for these processes of letting gods emerge as subject and interact with humans as subjects, right? So all of this is produced by social technologies as much as, if not more than, purely brain-based cognitive processes. Okay, second part, assemblages and the social lives of God. So as I said before, in the data I'm working with, people create bonds with specific gods, but there is never one purely exclusive world where a given human only lives with a given god without any interaction with other gods. All of this always happens in the Chinese context again, within what I would call assemblages. So why do I use the word assemblage and not pantheon? Is because pantheon tends to carry with it the idea that it has a fixed, stable structure, which in the Chinese case is almost never the case. We almost always encounter in China gods in the plural, in groups of gods, but these groups of gods, or assemblages of gods, are always context-specific. They are basically never twice the same group of gods, and as we have lots of gods, there is an almost infinite possibility for assemblages of gods. And I'm going to walk you very quickly through various types of assemblages, which are all real and meaningful in very specific contexts, but then these contexts are always ephemeral. So you have painted pantheons here, some of them, and I could describe these documents at length, obviously, but I'm not going to do that because of time, just to give you an idea of how varied these assemblages can be. So on the left, you have a ritual painted, we can call that painted pantheon if you like. It has a very clear hierarchical structure from the highest gods, the primeval gods, all the way down to the local spirits and the spirits of the dead, guarding the local community, right, and going through various ranks of gods. So here you have something very hierarchical. On the other side, this is a pantheon of the local gods around the city of Suzhou, so that's late 18th century. And here you have something much less hierarchical, right? It's all local village gods or neighborhoods or local community gods, right? So they all have more or less the same rank, so right? So this is much less hierarchical. So assemblages in painting, assemblages in actual temples. Most Chinese temples have tens, if not hundreds, of statues or other iconic representation of gods. So they live together, like in large condominium of gods. But still, even though you have a local temple with 200 or 300 gods, adding one more god is not a given. It's something that needs to be negotiated with the managers of the temple and also with the gods themselves. And people ask their opinion, and the gods might say, no, we don't want this new neighbor in our temple that is going to create trouble, and so on and so forth, right? So these assemblages are always place-specific. In a village, you can have 20 different temples, and you would have 20 different assemblages of gods, and some of the gods might be present in several, if not all of those temples, but each assemblage is very specific. And of course, the mediums who embody the gods are key to that process. On the right, you have a very famous medium in Hong Kong, who is actually a medium impersonating eccentric Buddhist monk, Jigong, and you see him standing next to the statue of the god. So right, so here you have basically the god in statue and the god in the flesh. They are the same. Collective geographies. So we have assemblages and gods in the way humans write their stories and talk about them. So this is taken from the illustrated geography of the gods. this family of texts has a long history, many different editions. Each edition expanded with more gods than the previous edition. So the latest and the most expansive, hundreds and hundreds of different gods. 1909. So each god has an illustration and a story. So that's also an assemblage, right? A way of putting together a list of gods and explaining who they are and what they are, the relationship between them, between them as well. During rituals, of course, long lists of gods are invited to be present in the space for the ritual performance. So that has a beginning and an end, right? So that might last for 20 minutes or 2 hours or maybe 3 days. And here you get a list of the gods. So that's when it's a particular kind of ritual called a litany, when you chant the name of these gods, and each so on top say we reverently invite and bow to that god, and below that you have the name of a particular god, and each time the name of God is chanted, then the whole assembly would bow to that god, right? So here it's also very convenient to extract lists of gods and specific assemblages of gods who are made co-present in a given ritual occasion. Okay. That's also kind of documents that I've been working with lately, which is the way gods are arranged, not in space, just like in a temple or painting, but in time. So these are fasting calendars. Right? So there are so many gods, and each of them has a birthday or death day or ascent day, and therefore within the religious literature, many books have as an appendix or a section these calendars listing the birthdays of the gods, when people who have a connection with that god are supposed to observe the fast. By fast, Chinese chai means no meat, no alcohol, no sex, right? To say it very simply. And of course, as the introductions to those calendars say very clearly, it's impossible to observe all of that, because you observe all the birthdays of the gods, then basically you're a monk or nun. And that it's okay if you have chosen to be a monk or nun, but the whole of humanity cannot become monks or nuns, otherwise humanity will just cease to exist within a generation. And so therefore, the compilers of those, and there are many of those different calendars, say, pick your date. If you have no particular connection to that god, you don't need to observe the fast on that day. But if you have that connection, then you should observe the fast. So there is a general framework, and then a space for personalizing your own religious practice by having your own calendar that fits with the calendars of the other, same logic, but is also unique to yourself, because each person has personal connection to different set of gods. So yeah, in that calendar we only have 162 days fasted outside of the whole year. But if you wanted to find a birthday of a god for each day, then you would actually very easily find it. And so how to make sense of those huge amount of data on divine assemblages in various forms, printed, painted, physically represented, and so on and so forth. And social network analysis is one, not the only way, but one, I think, effective and interesting way to make sense of this vast amount of data, right? And so it takes gods as actors, as non-human actors within social networks that also imply humans, right? And so here it's this project kind of crosses what Bruno Latour and others have done in terms of actor network theory and looking at how humans interact with other non-human actors to make society work, right? But at the same time, it also departs from that, because in Latour's view, the non-human actors are as purely extremely effective actor networks without having any interiority, right? Without being person and even less subjects, right? Whereas in the kind of networks I'm looking at, the networks, the sociability within divine human assemblages create the possibility for God to become person, right? And even more so to become subject, to express interiority. Not of all of them do, but some of them do, and the possibilities are always there, right? So that's how my use of the social network analysis differs from what Latwos and others, it's inspired by, but it also differs from what Latwos and others have been doing. Right? And what I found is that unlike what other scholars see in other cultural contexts, saying that in networks, persons are actually divided. They are not individuals, but individuals, right? People are different according when interacting with different actors. What I see, and that's not a theoretical hypothesis. It's really actual observation of the data. What I see in the case of Chinese God, especially through spirit writing, is that the more connected they are, the more they interact with other actors, human and divines, then the more clearly defined their personality is. Gods use their connection to other gods and to humans to reinforce their identity rather than multiplying and diversifying it. Okay? And so that's one example. That's just a screenshot from my online paper, so it's open access. So if you find these graphs funny, you can go and have a look. But that was a preliminary attempt, so I've published last year, of using formal social network analysis to look at the relation between the gods within the context of spirit writing. And we can also use other kinds of assemblages, right? The painted pantheons, the coexistence of gods, co-living of the gods in the temples, and the calendars, and so on and so forth. And I'm in the process of doing that. But this preliminary article only used spirit writing data. So I looked at 13 different spirit writing authors, differentiated, chosen from different historical periods, from the 16th to the 19th century, and different parts of the Chinese world, right, to look at differences. And within them, I identified almost 500 gods who were present and interacted with the other gods and the humans. And so for people who are more familiar with the maths of social network analysis, I found almost 700 edges, that is connection between a given god and a given spirit writing author. And so my visualization, you can always visualize data in all kinds of ways, but my visualization of the whole network is like this. And I could spend an hour commenting this. I will not, obviously. But the main point is, well, we can learn a lot of things from this. But one of the things is that most of the gods have small connectivity, that is, have small social networks, right? They are only connected to one group. Right? So that each black point is a god, okay? So most of the gods are on the periphery with few connections to other groups and other gods. But in the center, you see the more connected gods, what I would call the central gods. And if you visualize the gods, that is, the gods who have at least 7 connections, that is, they are part of the social lives of at least more than half of the different spirit writing groups chosen in the sample, then the almost 500 gods boil down to only 6, right? So here we have a list of the gods who are most connected. So you might recognize the gods I've been mentioning before, the first 3. So the first 3 was absolutely no surprise. They are perfectly well known. They have revealed hundreds or thousands of texts. They have their own canons of revelation. So everyone would be expecting to see them here. What was really interesting is the next 3, who are gods who are never discussed in the scholarly literature on spirit writing, because they have never revealed doctrinal text, but still they are very present, right? And so just as in social network analysis, looking at humans, you realize that people who are less famous, who have not been, very famous authors or intellectuals or been in very high-ranking position, but still who are extremely central because they know everyone and they connect everyone, and they are absolutely essential to the functioning of that society, even though they might not be immediately visible from the historical sources or from if you look at contemporary events from media coverage, it's the same thing in the society of the gods. There are certain gods that are absolutely essential to the functioning of that divine human society because they know everyone, they connect everyone, even though they don't produce major scriptures or other texts that people would chant every day and so on and so forth, right? And so this simple observation can also help us to revisit the whole corpus of spirit reading text and look at how this is not only about producing discursive contents, but it is also about creating connections, and certain gods are extremely good at creating these connections with other gods and with humans, right? And those three are very good examples. Actually, the last but one here is a major thunder god teaching spirit writing disciples to practice ritual and enforcing moral rules. So it's not about love and protection, it's more about discipline and punishment. But discipline and punishment is also very crucial to the functioning of societies, as we all know. And so this is a major god who makes sure that this society play by the rules, if you like. And therefore, humans have also a very strong connection to him, even though the affects, the emotions conveyed in their particular relation with that thunder god are not the same that they are conveyed with their relation with other gods, which are more, love and protection oriented. Okay, third and last part of this presentation: how to make sense of this whole array of data and analytical framework in a way that can foster comparative discussions with scholars working on other cultural, linguistic, and religious contexts. I'm going to talk about comparison in a moment, but first I felt, and of course this is a little bit going against the grain of my instinct as a historian, who should really basically focus on the sources and close reading of the sources. But I feel here that for engaging in that comparative project, we need clear definition of what we are talking about when we discuss invisibles, which is my larger category for all these entities, spirits, gods, and so forth. And what do we mean by describing them as person and subjects? Because these terms that might seem obvious because you use terms like person or subject in everyday language, but in both everyday language and in scholarly writing, there is actually no clear consensus on what it means to be a person or a subject, and therefore there can be quite a lot of misunderstanding between ourselves when we're approaching such subjects. So my definitional framework is something like this, where entities, whether, and this is true for all modes of existence, and I'm not going into modes of existence today, unless you give me another hour, which I think is not the plan. But humans, spirits, and still many other modes of existence, in all of those modes of existence, entities can go sort of up and down a sort of scale of what we might call, some people would call that ontological status, but I don't think that's a good idea to use this term. Something more like degree of singularity. From the most general, an entity is something that, and an entity that interacts with other entities in agent. So something that might be completely anonymous, amorphous, not well identified, but just that does things, that interacts. And once it's actually named and recognized as something distant from other agents, then it becomes an individual. And when an individual has a story, is considered responsible for its own action and as a story, and is being described, the story is being described by others, then that becomes a person. And when the person talks from itself and talks about himself, so use the first person pronoun, then that person becomes a subject. So my definition is this, and I don't claim that's the right definition, it's just the one that I found useful for the kind of project I'm presenting to you today. And these processes can go up and down, or so a person can become a subject if it's given the possibility to say, I like this, I want this. But a person can cease to be a subject. And that's true for gods. It's also true for humans. Some humans, sometimes under certain circumstances, stop to act as subject, just do what they're expected to do. A subject is fundamentally disruptive because it's never fully known by anyone, including oneself. And there are some psychoanalytical insights in here, but I'm not really going into that. But what I mean is that there are processes that, and conditions of possibility, and as I will argue, ritual processes for allowing individuals to become persons to become subjects, including for invisibles, spirits, gods. But that's never given forever. And a god can cease to be a subject, and even cease to be a person, and just return to the state of just being an individual or just an agent. Okay? So that's excessively theoretical, but that's the framework I'm working with, right? And so they are, right, processes, going up, agentification, becoming an agent, individuation, personification, subjectification, right? The processes of, and each of those processes establishes special types of relationship with others, other humans and other gods, or both, right? And these processes can happen spontaneously. So we have events of gods, spirits, invisibles, manifesting themselves, engaging with others, but it can also be ritually produced through ritual devices. And my main comparative hypothesis is that the availability, the simple fact that certain ritual techniques are known, are just available for people to use them, and the social acceptability of those ritual processes to create invisibles, spirits, gods, to become person, and even more so to become subject in a given society, is a key, I don't say the only, but certainly a key factor for explaining the existence or the absence of divine persons and divine subjects in a given society, right? So if rituals exist, even though they might not be commonly practiced, if they exist, then that makes it possible, thinkable, for people to engage with God as person and even as subjects, right? And these events might then also happen spontaneously. Right? I don't think there are cultures where there is no ritual means for letting the God speak, and still the God speak to us, right? So that's an hypothesis. Maybe there would be exceptions. But my focus is on the ritual processes for allowing invisibles, spirits, gods, to become persons, and once they have become persons, to become subject. Therefore, I've come up with a list of those ritual devices or techniques to allow invisibles to go up that scale, right? From mere agents to individuals to persons to subjects. And obviously, this is not a comprehensive list, and I'm very happy to have to hear suggestion for adding more items to this list. But that's what I was, and I'm not going through this in detail, obviously. But nomination that allows us an invisible to become individual because it has a name. Storytelling, the way we talk about those entities, God, spirits, and tell their stories. Figuration, animations of the figures, right? So created, animated statues, icons, so on and so forth. The invitation during a ritual, the performing on stage, possession, spirit writing as a distinct kind of possession, visualization, shamanism, so creating the divine presence in a mental space where you can interact with that divine entity, and dreams and visit to the other world. And if we look specifically at subjectification, that is the last process in that scale where gods, spirits start to express interiority, talk about themselves, and say, I want this. and therefore surprise people. Subjects are always unsettling and surprising, right? Then what I see is five main ritual processes for allowing gods to become subjects and address us as subjects. So the performing on stage, and here you have an actor playing the god Guandi I was mentioning before, the martial god, with many revelations for spirit writing, and here he's on stage. There was a ban on playing Guandi on stage in Imperial China, at least during the last dynasty, 17th to early 20th century. Because the government knew all too well that if you allow the gods to speak on stage, then and you never know what they are going to say. Because, yeah, and that might be tricky and lead to all kinds of very uncomfortable situations. Because and there was a ban, but still, people did it, an awful lot. And actors playing Guandi were possessed just before entering stage, right? So they were Guandi. It's extremely powerful, potentially violent god present on stage. Right? Some authorities didn't want that, but still it was done. Performing, possession, spirit writing, visualization, and dreams, right? And in all of those situations, the gods really, well, many gods says, if given the opportunity, by being invited to be on stage, by being invited into the body of a spirit medium, by being invited to write with the phoenix, by being invited to be present in the model space of the practitioner or being in a dream. And dream, of course, can be spontaneous, but it's also ritually produced. There are dreaming temples in China, as they were in ancient Greece and in Japan and in many other cultures, right? Gods can be invited into our dreams. And so when gods are invited through those five means, and maybe others as well, then many of them seize the opportunity to, well, speak their mind and talk about themselves. And so what I'm interested in is the comparative possibility, technical possibility for doing this ritual, and the acceptability. And these are two key elements of those ritual means. So here, and I'm going to wrap up very quickly, with that. So that's not, politics of the invisible means if a ritual technique is known. In some cases, some ritual techniques are just not known, right? In China before the 11th century, there was no spirit writing. There was other ways to communicate. I mean, dreams, visualization, yes, but no spirit writing. So the simple appearance, newly made, available ritual technique does change things in the way people interact with gods. But once the ritual techniques are there, they are available, there is the question of how acceptable it is to use them. And we see in many cultures in China as elsewhere that ritual techniques that are known are considered beyond the pale, not acceptable, because they are disruptive. Again, if you let gods talk about themselves and say what they really think and want, then that might become really awkward for lots of people, if not for society as a whole. And so there are political constraints on the use of those processes of personification and even more so subjectification, right? Because in fact, if you want gods just to give blessings, if you want gods to make rain, chase away epidemics, that kind of things, you don't need divine persons, and even less divine subjects, right? Just an entity who answers prayers, and that's good enough. You don't want person. If you want person, and even more so subjects, that's because you want this particular experience of interacting on an intersubjective basis with the gods, right? Which might be, and that's a key point that Tanya Lohmann makes, that's something that may be very beneficial to individuals, but not necessarily to society, right? And that's why we have all kinds of constraints. The oracles, the response of the god through oracles are usually, the questions are framed. That's clear, for instance, from the ancient Greek case. The questions were posed in such a way that the god could not actually talk about himself. The question was really practical. It's solving one particular human problem. Bans and spirit possession. It's all over humanity. Usually in the modern age in the name of fighting superstitions or fear of prophecy. But more deeply, it's really a wish to control the gods and not letting the god free range to, again, speak their mind, and who knows what is in the mind of the gods. In China, a very interesting case of the city gods. The first emperor of the Ming Dynasty make it compulsory, mandatory to have city gods temples everywhere. Each place there is a sitting official. Then there is also his partner in the other world, the city god, who works with him. And 2 years after he decreed the instauration of this empire-wide cult, he had another edict saying, yes, but these gods are not persons. They are forces of nature. So he banned anthropomorphic representation. He banned them having a distinct birthday and a name and so on and so forth, right? So we want the divine force, but we don't want a person. And so that's my last slide, right? It's just the idea that the next stage, so I want to engage in comparison and looking at processes and constraint over divine personification and subjectification across cultures, so that some of the comparenda, this list is just because of my own particular trajectory and cooperation with other scholars, but of course we can compare with any culture, right? That's the kind of literature I'm reading at the moment, right? But I'm very happy to compare with other comparada than those, and looking at what is available and what are the constraints on letting gods express themselves through those various ritual means across culture. Thank you very much for your attention.